The great chamber floated in space like a metal flower with 12 petals, each one representing a different species in the Galactic Council, and Captain Lee Hyun stood at the observation window, watching the delegates take their seats below. He had been coming to these meetings for 8 years now, and each time felt the same cold weight in his stomach as he watched the other species look at the human section with barely hidden disgust or amusement. Today felt different, though, and Lee Hyun could not shake the feeling that something was about to break Dr. Park. Sumi joined him at the window, carrying her usual stack of cultural notes and translation guides, and she nodded toward the Valkyrie section, where tall gray beings with too many joints moved with their characteristic jerky motions. They requested this emergency session, she said quietly. Something about new requirements for council membership. Commander Kim Dae appeared beside them with his military bearing and sharp eyes that missed nothing, and he had been watching the other military observers, and Lee Hyun could tell from his expression that the news was not good. The Nexari brought their full diplomatic corps, Kim Dae said. Crystal beings don't waste time on ceremony unless something big is happening. Down in the chamber, Ambassador Choi Wan took his place at the human delegation table, and at 60 years old he still carried himself like the soldier he had been before becoming a diplomat, and his gray hair was perfectly neat, and his uniform bore the simple blue and white of Earth. The Valkyrie Prime Minister rose first, and his voice carried clearly through the chamber's translation system, and he was tall, even by Valkyrie standards, with skin like polished stone and eyes that glowed with inner light. Fellow council members, the Prime Minister began, we gather today to address a growing concern about the development of newer species in our community. Lee Hyun felt Park Sumi tense beside him, and they both knew what this meant. The Valkyrie Empire has completed a comprehensive study of civilizational development patterns among our junior members, the Prime Minister continued, and we have identified several areas where guidance is needed to prevent dangerous mistakes. The Nexari representative rose next, and unlike the Valkyrie, the crystal being did not waste words on diplomacy, and when it spoke, its voice sounded like breaking glass. The study shows that species admitted to the Council in the last century lack proper understanding of galactic stability, the Nexari said. Their aggressive expansion and military development threatens the peace we have maintained for thousands of years. Lee Hyun did not need to look down to know that every eye in the chamber was now fixed on the human delegation. The Thrakari delegate stood, and his insect-like mandibles clicked as he spoke, and the Thrakari had always been allies of the Valkyrie, and their support was never surprising. The evidence is clear. The Thrakari said, species like the human show classic signs of primitive aggression, and their rapid territorial expansion mimics the behavior of civilizations that have caused galactic wars in the past. Ambassador Choi Wan remained seated, and his face showed no emotion. But Lee Hyun had worked with him long enough to see the small signs of growing anger. Dr. Park Sumi whispered translations of the side conversations happening in various languages, and most of it was not good for humanity. The Valkyrie Prime Minister activated a holographic display showing human space, and their colonies were marked in red, while other species appeared in softer colors. The Human Colonial Authority has established settlements in 47 systems in just 4 decades, the Prime Minister said. This rate of expansion exceeds recommended guidelines by 300%. Commander Kim Dae made a soft sound of disgust, and Lee Hyun understood why, and humans had been invited to settle those systems by the Council itself when other species declared them too difficult or dangerous to colonize. Furthermore, the Valkyrie continued, human military vessels carry armaments that exceed peaceful exploration requirements, and their fleet expansion suggests preparation for aggressive action. The Nexari projected another display, and this one showed human ship designs compared to other species, and the human vessels looked crude and heavily armed next to the elegant designs of the older civilizations. Human technology development also shows concerning patterns, the Nexari said. They consistently choose military applications over cultural advancement, and their research priorities indicate a warrior society. Lee Hyun wanted to laugh at the absurdity, and humans had developed better weapons because the galaxy was dangerous, and species like the Valkyrie had made it clear that weakness would not be tolerated. A smaller species called the Ythani requested permission to speak, and they were one of the few species that had always treated humans with respect, and Li Hyun hoped for some support. "The humans have been valuable members of our community," the Ythani delegate said carefully. "They have mediated several disputes, and their technology has helped with trade route security." The Velkari Prime Minister waved a dismissive hand, and his expression made it clear that he considered the Ythani opinion irrelevant. "Which brings us to our recommendations," what the Prime Minister said. "The Council has prepared a new framework called Civilizational Maturity Requirements." The holographic display changed to show a long list of restrictions and requirements, and Li Hyun felt his blood run cold as he read. Through them, human military vessels would be limited to specific designs approved by the Council, and human expansion would be frozen at current levels, and 12 of their outer colonies would be transferred to Council oversight for proper development. Dr. Park Sumi made a small gasping sound, and those 12 colonies were home to nearly 50 million humans, and they were among the most successful settlements that humans had established. Additionally, the Velkari continued, human research and development will be conducted under Council supervision to ensure proper priorities are maintained. The restrictions continued, and humans would be required to accept Council advisors in their government, and their trade would be managed through Council-approved partners, and their military academies would be restructured to teach peaceful values. Ambassador Choi Won finally stood, and the chamber fell silent as he looked around at the assembled delegates, and his voice carried clearly without the need for amplification. "How long do we have to consider these requirements?" he asked. The Velkari Prime Minister seemed pleased by what he interpreted as cooperation, and he smiled with too many teeth. "The requirements take effect immediately," he said. "Compliance officers are already en route to human space to begin implementation." Something changed in Ambassador Choi Won's posture, and Lee Hyun had seen that look before in soldiers who had reached their breaking point. "I see," the ambassador said quietly, and then he did something that shocked everyone in the chamber. He reached up and removed his translation device and set it carefully on the table, and when he spoke again, it was in clear Korean that only the human delegation could understand. 40년 동안 우리는 동등한 파트너가 되려고 노력했습니다. He said, "We tried for 40 years to be equal partners." Park Sumi translated quietly for the observation deck, and her voice was steady, despite the magnitude of what was happening. "지금 우리는 틀렸다는 것을 압니다. Ambassador Choi." One continued, "Now we know we were wrong." The other delegates began murmuring in confusion as they realized the humans were no longer using the translation system, and the Velkari Prime Minister demanded to know what was being said. Ambassador Choi Won gathered his materials and stood, and he looked around the chamber one final time. And then he spoke in perfect galactic standard that everyone could understand. "The human delegation withdraws from the Galactic Council effective immediately," he said. "We came seeking partnership among equals and instead found masters seeking slaves." The chamber erupted in shocked voices, and the Velkari Prime Minister rose to his feet, with his face showing outrage. "You cannot simply leave," he said. "Council membership carries obligations and responsibilities." Ambassador Choi Won smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Our obligations were to the Council," he said. "This body no longer qualifies as a council of equals." He turned and walked toward the exit, and the other human delegates followed, and Dr. Park Sumi and Commander Kim Dae left the observation deck to join them, and Lee Hyun took one last look at the chaos in the chamber below. The Velkari were shouting about treaties and legal obligations, while the Nexari demanded explanations, and the smaller species looked confused and frightened, and no one seemed to understand that something fundamental had just changed. Lee Hyun followed his colleagues out of the chamber and toward their shuttle, and behind them he could hear the Velkari Prime Minister calling for security forces to prevent their departure. Human shuttle lifted off from the council station without incident, and the other species were too shocked to react quickly, and as they cleared the station's defense perimeter, Lee Hyun looked back at the metal flower that had been humanity's introduction to galactic civilization. "What happens now?" he asked Ambassador Choi Won. The older man was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, His voice carried a weight that suggested he had been thinking about this moment for years. Now we find out what humans can become when no one is holding us back, he said. The shuttle jumped to hyperspace and left the council station behind, and in the chamber they had abandoned, the Velkari Prime Minister was already making plans to teach the humans the cost of defying galactic authority. 6 months had passed since the humans walked out of the Galactic Council, and Admiral Baek-jin stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the last transport leave Kepler Station, and the station had been humanity's primary trade hub for 20 years. But now it sat empty in the void with its docking bay sealed and its lights dimmed. Final sweep complete, reported Captain Jang Tae from the communications station. All civilians evacuated and all equipment removed or destroyed. Baek-jin nodded and turned to Dr. Yoon Mira, who was reviewing data on her portable display, and she had been working 16-hour days for months coordinating the most complex logistics operation in human history. How many more sites? He asked. 47 trade posts, 12 research stations, and 6 diplomatic outposts, she replied without looking up. The last evacuations will be complete within the week. The Admiral walked to the main display where the current positions of human vessels appeared as blue dots scattered across the galaxy, and to anyone watching it would look like chaos. But Baek-jin knew better, and every ship was exactly where it needed to be. Engineer Lim Sora approached from the technical station, and her uniform bore the insignia of the research division, and she carried the kind of excited expression that meant breakthrough news. "Admiral," she said, "the final test of the Void Gate system was successful, and we can now transport entire fleets without using conventional hyperspace lanes." Dr. Yoon Mira looked up from her display with interest, and the Void Gate project had been her idea based on theoretical physics that other species had dismissed as impossible. "How long until full deployment?" Yoon Mira asked. "The first-generation gates are already in place at the primary sites," Lim Sora replied. "We can begin Phase 2 relocations immediately." Baek-jin studied the star charts, and the locations marked in red represented Council-controlled space, while the vast dark areas between spiral arms remained largely unexplored, and those dark areas would become humanity's new home. The communication system chimed with an incoming message, and Captain Jang Tae accepted the transmission, and his expression grew grim as he listened. "Report from the Nexari border," he said. "3 council species have sent inspection fleets to human colonies, and they're demanding explanations for the population relocations." "Let me guess," Baek-jin said. "They found empty settlements with no signs of struggle." "Exactly," Jang Tae replied. "They're confused about how 50 million people could relocate without leaving traces." Dr. Yoon Mira smiled, and her team had spent years perfecting the evacuation procedures, and when humans left a world, they took everything, including the orbital infrastructure, and even the genetic templates of local ecosystem modifications. "Any response from the Council?" Baek-jin asked. "The Velkari are claiming we're in violation of territorial treaties," Jang Tae said. "They're demanding we return to negotiations." The Admiral felt a cold satisfaction, and the Velkari still thought this was about territory and trade agreements, and they had no idea what humanity was really doing. Engineer Lim Sora activated a holographic display showing the current locations of human populations, and instead of the familiar cluster of colonies near Earth, humanity now existed in scattered groups throughout the galactic dark zones. "The void between operations are ahead of schedule," she reported. "We've established 7 primary bases and 43 secondary outposts in regions that other species consider uninhabitable." Dr. Yoon Mira pulled up her own display showing resource extraction and manufacturing capacity, and the numbers were impressive for a civilization that had supposedly retreated. "Production is actually higher than before," she said. "Turns out we're much more efficient without council regulations and oversight committees." Captain Jang Tae received another communication, and this one made him frown with concern. "Admiral," he said, "we're getting reports of increased council military activity, and they're positioning fleets near former human space." "Let them," Baek-jin replied. "They'll find empty systems and automated defenses." The automated defenses were another surprise that humanity had prepared, and the systems looked simple from the outside, but they incorporated technology that the Council species had never seen, and any non-human ship that approached would find itself gently but firmly redirected away from human worlds. "What about our observers?" the Admiral asked. "Phase 3 reconnaissance is proceeding perfectly," Jiang Te replied. "We now have complete intelligence on Council military positions, trade routes, and resource dependencies." This was perhaps the most important part of humanity's new strategy, and while the Council thought humans had disappeared, Captain Jiang Tai's stealth ships were watching everything, and the new cloaking technology made human vessels completely invisible to Council sensors. Dr. Yoon Mira brought up another display showing the political situation in Council space, and the picture was not encouraging for the remaining species. "Without human mediators, 3 major trade disputes have escalated to military positioning," she reported. "The Velkari and Nexari are openly disagreeing for the first time in centuries." "That was predictable," Baekjin said. "We handled most of the minor diplomatic issues that kept everyone stable." Engineer Lim Sora looked up from her technical readings, and her expression was thoughtful. "Admiral," she said, "the deep space monitoring stations are detecting some unusual activity, and it looks like the Nexari are trying to reverse engineer our FTL signatures. Can they succeed?" he asked. "Not with their current understanding of dimensional mechanics," she replied. "But they're learning that we're using principles they don't recognize." This was exactly what Baekjin had hoped would happen, and humanity's greatest advantage was not superior firepower or better technology, but rather their completely different approach to physics and engineering. The communication system activated again, and this time Captain Jiang Tai looked surprised as he accepted the transmission. "It's from one of our deep reconnaissance units," he said. "They've made contact with a Council patrol." The main display changed to show the recorded encounter, and a single human vessel faced 3 Velkari military ships, and the human captain was a young woman named Han Sol who commanded one of the new stealth frigate's unknown vessel. The Velkari commander's voice came through clearly. "You are in violation of territorial boundaries and will submit to inspection." Han Sol's response was calm and professional, and she spoke in perfect Velkari, which surprised the aliens. "We don't talk to strangers anymore," she said simply. The Velkari commander seemed confused by this response, and he demanded identification and compliance with Council regulations. "You are human," he said. "Humans are subject to Council authority." Han Sol smiled, and her ship's new defensive systems activated, and to the Velkari sensors, the human vessel simply vanished as if it had never existed. "Fascinating," Dr. Yoon Mira said as the recording ended. "The dimensional shift technology works even better than we hoped." "How many of these encounters have occurred?" Admiral Baekjin asked. 17 confirmed contacts, Captain Jiang Tai replied. "In every case, our ships disappeared before the Council vessels could react." Engineer Lim Sora pulled up technical data on the stealth encounters, and each one had provided valuable intelligence on Council sensor capabilities and response protocols. "We're learning their weaknesses faster than they're learning our capabilities," she observed, "and our technological advantage is increasing with each contact." The Admiral walked to the main viewport and looked out at the stars, and somewhere in that darkness, millions of humans were building a new kind of civilization, and they were free from Council oversight and Council limitations and Council expectations. "Status report on the primary construction projects?" he asked. "The deep dark shipyards are operational at 60% capacity," Lim Sora reported. "We're producing vessels with capabilities that exceed anything in Council space." "What about the research initiatives?" Dr. Yoon Mira asked. "Beyond schedule," Lim Sora replied with enthusiasm. "When our best scientists don't have to explain their work to alien oversight committees, innovation happens much faster." Captain Jiang Tai looked up from his communication station, and his expression was serious. "Admiral," he said, "we're receiving distress signals from several minor species, and they're requesting human assistance with mediation services." This was the moment Baekjin had been waiting for, and the smaller species in Council space were beginning to realize that humanity's departure had left them vulnerable to the major powers. "What's our response?" Dr. Yoon Mira asked. "We help them," the Admiral replied. but not through council channels and not under council rules. He turned to address his senior staff, and his voice carried the weight of a decision that would reshape galactic politics. Begin. Phase 4 operations, he ordered. It's time to show the galaxy what human diplomacy looks like when we're not asking permission. The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency and across human space. Coded signals activated sleeper protocols and reconnaissance units and diplomatic teams that had been waiting for months. Engineer Lim Sora smiled as she monitored the system activations, and the real test was about to begin. The council thinks we retreated, she said quietly. They have no idea that we've been advancing the whole time. Dr. Yoon Mira was already preparing intelligence briefings on the species that had requested help, and humanity would respond, but on their own terms and under their own rules. 1 year had passed since humanity vanished from council space, and General Song-wook stood in the command center of Void Station Alpha, watching reports stream in from across the galaxy, and each report confirmed what Dr. Ryu Hana had predicted months earlier. The Nexari-Thrakari mining dispute has escalated to military positioning, reported Captain Oh Seung from the Intelligence Division. 3 Nexari battle groups are facing 2 Thrakari fleets at the Kepler 186 asteroid fields. Scientist Nam Yuna looked up from her research station where she had been analyzing the latest breakthrough in human technology development. What was the original disagreement? She asked. Mining rights to a platinum-rich asteroid cluster. Oh Seung replied, the kind of dispute that humans use to resolve in a few days of mediation. General Song-wook nodded grimly, and humanity had handled hundreds of similar disputes during their time in the council, and the process had been so routine that other species had taken it for granted. How long have they been staring at each other? He asked. 11 weeks, Oh Seung said, and neither side is willing to back down without losing face. Dr. Ryu Hana entered the command center carrying her latest analysis of council psychological profiles, and her expression showed both satisfaction at being right and concern for what her predictions meant. The situation is developing exactly as the model suggested, she reported. Without human mediators, the council species are reverting to historical behavior patterns. She activated a holographic display showing the current political situation in council space, and the familiar cooperative structure had been replaced by rigid alliance blocks that faced each other with growing hostility. The Velkari Empire has absorbed 4 smaller species as protectorates, she continued. While the Nexari Collective is demanding tribute from trading partners, scientist Nam Yuna paused her technical work to study the political display, and her background in xenobiology gave her insights that purely military analysts might miss. They're behaving like territorial animals, she observed. The cooperative behaviors they showed during the council period were learned responses, not natural instincts. General Song-wook walked to the main strategic display, where human activities appeared as subtle indicators scattered throughout the galaxy, and to any outside observer it would look like random background noise. Update on our reconnaissance operations? He asked. We now have complete surveillance coverage of all major council systems, Captain Oh Seung reported. Our stealth technology continues to be completely undetected. The stealth technology was Nam Yuna's greatest achievement, and human ships could now operate in what she called dimensional shadow, existing partially outside normal space-time while maintaining the ability to observe and interact with the regular universe. Any attempts to counter our capabilities? The general asked. The Nexari have deployed new sensor arrays, Oh Seung said, but they're still working with fundamentally flawed assumptions about how our technology operates. Dr. Ryu Hana brought up her latest intelligence analysis, and her expression was troubled. There's something else, she said. We're detecting massive resource mobilization by both the Velkari and Nexari, and it looks like preparation for a major conflict. This was the development that General Song-wook had been dreading, and the 2 most powerful council species had maintained an uneasy peace for over 5 centuries, but that peace had depended on careful diplomatic balance. Timeline estimates? He asked. 6 months to full military readiness, Ryu Hana replied. Maybe less if they continue accelerating production. Scientist Nam Yuna looked up from her technical displays with excitement that seemed inappropriate for the dire political situation. General, she said, I need to show you something that might change our strategic options. She activated her personal holographic projector, and the display showed what appeared to be empty space, but the readings indicated massive energy signatures. We've achieved stable dimensional folding, she announced. We can now create structures that exist in compressed space-time. General Song-wook studied the readings and tried to understand the implications. Explain it in simple terms, he said. We can build a city-sized structure that occupies the physical space of a small asteroid. Nam Yuna replied, and from the outside, it would be completely invisible to conventional sensors. Captain Oh Sung leaned forward with interest, and his intelligence background made him immediately grasp the military applications. How large can these structures be? He asked. Theoretically unlimited, Nam Yuna said with a smile. We could fold an entire fleet into the space of a single ship. Dr. Ryuhana was already working through the political implications, and her strategic mind was connecting possibilities that others might miss. This changes everything, she said quietly. We're not just technologically ahead of the Council species. We're operating in dimensions they don't understand. The communication system activated, and an urgent message came through from one of their deep space monitoring stations. General, the voice reported, we're detecting a massive energy surge from the direction of the former human colony at Ross 128. Everyone in the command center turned to the main display as sensor data streamed in from the monitoring station. What kind of energy surge? General Song-wook asked. Unknown configuration, came the reply. It's unlike anything in our database or any known Council technology. Captain Oh Shung quickly accessed intelligence files on Ross 128, and his expression grew concerned as he read. That system was abandoned during our withdrawal, he said. All human personnel and equipment were evacuated 11 months ago. Scientist Nam Yuna was analyzing the energy readings, and her excitement was building as she recognized familiar patterns. General, she said, those energy signatures match our dimensional folding experiments, but on a scale we've never attempted. Are you saying someone else has developed our technology? He asked. No. She replied with growing certainty. I think our automated systems have been evolving. This was a possibility that no one had considered, and the defensive systems that humanity had left behind were designed to learn and adapt, but the extent of their development had been underestimated. Dr. Ryuhana was already pulling up reports from other abandoned human systems, and the pattern was becoming clear. We're getting similar readings from 14 other former colonies, she reported. Whatever happened at Ross 128 is happening throughout former human space. General Song-wook felt a mixture of pride and concern as he realized the implications. Our technology is advancing without us, he said. The systems we left behind are innovating independently. Captain Oh Seung received another urgent communication, and his expression showed alarm as he listened. General, he said, a Velkari exploration fleet just attempted to survey the Ross 128 system. And, Song-wook asked, they're reporting that the system no longer exists in normal space. Oh Seung replied. Their sensors show empty coordinates, but their gravitational readings indicate massive structures that they cannot see or interact with. Scientist. Nam Yuna laughed with delight and clapped her hands together. The automated systems have achieved full dimensional phase shift, she said. They've moved entire planetary systems into folded space. Dr. Ryuhana was studying the strategic implications, and her expression showed both awe and concern. The Council. Species aren't just technologically behind us, she said. They're operating in a completely different reality. This development had implications that went far beyond military advantage, and humanity had accidentally created a new form of existence that other species could not perceive or understand. What about our people in those systems? General Song-wook asked. According to our quantum communication links, they're fine, Nam Yuna replied. They can still interact with normal space when they choose to, but they're essentially invisible to outside observation. The communication system activated again, and this time the message came from one of their diplomatic reconnaissance team's general. The voice reported, We've intercepted communications between Velkari and Nexari leadership, and they're both claiming that humans have developed reality manipulation technology. Captain Oh-seung looked up from his analysis with a grim expression. "They're scared," he said simply. "For the first time in centuries, the major council species are facing something they don't understand." Dr. Ryu Hana brought up her latest psychological profiles, and the data showed increasing stress patterns among council leadership. "Fear makes them dangerous," she warned. "Scared animals attack unpredictably." General Song-wook walked to the main viewport and looked out at the stars that surrounded Void Station Alpha, and somewhere in that darkness, human civilization was evolving in ways that even its creators had not anticipated. "Recommendations?" he asked his senior staff. "We continue monitoring," Captain Oh-seung said, "but we also prepare for the possibility that the council species will unite against what they perceive as a human threat. We accelerate our dimensional research," scientist Nam Yuna added. "If we're already operating in folded space, we might as well master it completely." Dr. Ryu Hana consulted her strategic assessments, and her voice was thoughtful. "We prepare to make contact with the species caught between the major powers," she said. "They're going to need alternatives to Velkari or Nexari protection." General Song-wook made his decision and turned back to his staff. "Begin Phase 5 operations," he ordered. "It's time to offer the galaxy a third option." As his team, 2 years had passed since humanity abandoned the Galactic Council, and Admiral Ko-min watched from the bridge of her flagship as the first shots were fired in what historians would later call the Velkari-Nexari War, and the energy beams crossed the void between massive fleets that had been staring at each other for months. "Confirmed hits on 3 Nexari vessels," reported Captain Lee Na from the tactical station. "The Velkari are using their new plasma cascade weapons." Engineer Shinbok looked up from his dimensional monitoring equipment, and his readings showed the massive energy expenditure of a full-scale space battle. "The energy signatures are off the charts," he said. "They're using enough power to supply." A small planet strategist Yang Ho was analyzing the battle formations on his holographic display, and his expression showed professional interest mixed with sadness, classic council tactics. He observed massive ships' overwhelming firepower and no concern for collateral damage. Admiral Ko-min had seen enough space battles during her career, but this one felt different, because it represented the complete breakdown of galactic civilization, and the Velkari Empire and Nexari Collective had finally stopped pretending to cooperate. "How did it start?" she asked. "Dispute over salvage rights to a derelict space station?" Captain Lee Na replied. "The kind of minor issue that would have been resolved in committee 2 years ago." The irony was not lost on any of them, and humans had spent decades handling exactly these kinds of disputes, and now the 2 most powerful species in the galaxy were destroying each other over something that could have been settled in an afternoon. "Casualties?" Admiral Ko-min asked. 17 ships destroyed so far," Lee Na reported. "Estimated crew losses are approaching 50,000. Engineer Shinbok was monitoring communications intercepts, and his expression showed growing concern. "Admiral," he said, "both sides are calling for reinforcements, and this isn't going to end with one battle." Yang Ho brought up his strategic analysis, and the display showed military movements throughout Council space. "The Velkari have activated their mutual defense treaties," he reported. 4 allied species are mobilizing fleets to support them. "What about the Nexari response?" Admiral Ko-min asked. "They're demanding tribute from their trading partners to fund military expansion," Yang Ho replied. "Several species have already refused and declared neutrality." This was exactly what Dr. Ryu Hana had predicted 18 months earlier, and the artificial unity of the Council was collapsing along ancient species lines, and old grudges were surfacing after centuries of suppression. Captain Lee Na received an urgent communication, and her expression showed alarm as she listened. "Admiral," she said, "we're receiving distress signals from the Ythani homeworld, and they're reporting Velkari ships entering their space without permission." The Ythani had always been one of the few species that treated humans with respect, and they were small and peaceful and completely unprepared for military confrontation. "Are they requesting assistance?" Admiral Ko-min asked. "They're asking for human mediation," Lee Na replied. "Apparently, they still think we're part of the diplomatic process." Engineer Shinbok looked up from his technical displays and his voice was quiet. "Admiral," he said, "we could help them, and our new dimensional technology would make it simple to protect their worlds." Admiral Ko Min walked to the main strategic display and studied the positions of human forces throughout the galaxy, and humanity now operated from mobile bases that existed partially outside normal spacetime. "What's our current invisibility status?" she asked. "Complete," Shinbok replied. "Council sensors still cannot detect our dimensional shifted facilities, and our ships remain untrackable when we choose." Strategist Yang Ho was analyzing the broader implications of intervention if we help. "The Yathani," he said. "Other species will expect similar assistance and will be drawn back into galactic politics." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," Captain Li Na suggested. "We left to avoid being controlled, not to avoid helping people." This was the decision that Admiral Ko Min had been dreading and expected, and humanity could remain hidden in the dark spaces between stars, or they could step forward to offer alternatives to species trapped between the major powers. The communication system activated with another urgent message, and this time the report came from one of their deep reconnaissance units. "Admiral," the voice said, "Velkari forces are approaching former human colonies in the Tau Ceti region, and they appear to be planning occupation." "Any response from our automated defenses?" she asked. "Negative," came the reply. "The defensive systems are maintaining passive mode as programmed." Engineer Shinbok smiled at this, and the defensive systems he had helped design were sophisticated enough to distinguish between exploration and invasion, and they would only activate if directly threatened. "What happens if the Velkari try to land troops?" Yang Ho asked. "They'll discover that our worlds exist in folded space," Shinbok replied. "Their equipment will detect habitable planets, but they won't be able to interact with them. This would be the first direct test of humanity's new dimensional technology against Council military forces, and the results would determine whether humans could remain hidden or would be forced into open conflict." Captain Li Na was monitoring the Velkari approach, and her readings showed standard invasion formation. "They're deploying landing craft," she reported. "Estimated force is 12,000 troops with heavy equipment." Admiral Ko Min made her decision and turned to her senior staff. "Begin Phase 6 operations," she ordered. "It's time to show the galaxy that there are alternatives to domination and submission." Engineer Shinbok activated his experimental communication array and sent coded signals to human diplomatic teams that had been waiting in hidden positions throughout the galaxy. "Diplomatic teams are now active," he reported. "We're ready to make contact with species seeking alternatives to Velkari or Nexari protection." Strategist Yang Ho brought up intelligence reports on species that had declared neutrality in the growing conflict. "The Yathani, Altrani, and Corvani have all requested human assistance," he said. "They represent nearly 2 billion sentient beings." Captain Li Na was tracking the Velkari landing attempt, and her expression showed amazement. "Admiral," she said, "the Velkari troops have landed on what appears to be an empty world, and their sensors show a thriving colony, but they can't see or interact with anything. Are our people safe?" Admiral Ko Min asked. "Completely," Li Na replied. "They're watching the Velkari from dimensional phase shift, and the invaders can't even perceive them. This demonstration of human capability would send shockwaves through Council space, and both the Velkari and Nexari would realize that humanity had developed technology beyond their understanding." Engineer Shinbok received confirmations from his diplomatic teams, and his expression showed excitement. "Admiral," he said, "we've made successful contact with 7 neutral species, and they're all interested in alternatives to the current power structure." "What are we offering them?" Yang Ho asked. "Partnership instead of protection," Admiral Ko Min replied. "Cooperation instead of tribute." This was humanity's fundamental difference from the Council approach, and instead of creating hierarchies of power, humans offered networks of mutual support. The communication system activated with an emergency transmission, and the voice belonged to Ambassador Choi Won, who had been working with refugees from the expanding conflict. "Admiral," he said, "the situation is accelerating, and we have over 3 million refugees from 17 species requesting sanctuary in human space. This was the moment that Admiral Ko Min had been preparing for, and humanity would either retreat further into the dark spaces or step forward to offer leadership based on different principles. Approved, she said without hesitation. Begin full refugee assistance operations. Captain Li Na looked up from her tactical displays and her voice was thoughtful. Admiral, she said, once we start helping refugees and mediating disputes, the Council powers will see us as a threat to their authority. Let them. Admiral Ko Min replied. We tried their way for 4 decades and it led to this. She gestured toward the tactical display where the Velkari-Nexari War was expanding to involve more species, and more systems. Engineer Shinbok was monitoring energy. Readings from across the galaxy and his expression showed concern. The conflict is spreading faster than predicted, he reported. At current rates, most of Council space will be involved within 6 months. Strategist Yang Ho brought up casualty projections, and the numbers were staggering. If this continues, he said, we're looking at billions of deaths and the complete collapse of galactic civilization. Admiral Ko Min walked to the main viewport and looked out at the stars that had once seemed so peaceful when viewed from the Council chamber. Not if we can help it, she said quietly. She turned back to her senior staff, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had made a fundamental decision. Send a message to all human diplomatic teams, she ordered. Inform every species that seeks an alternative, that humanity offers partnership without domination and cooperation without surrender. As her staff moved to implement the orders, Admiral Ko Min reflected on how much had changed since humans walked out of the Council chamber. They had not retreated from galactic civilization but had instead evolved beyond it, and now they would find out whether other species could evolve as well. 3 years had passed since humanity left the Galactic Council, and President Kang Yul stood on the observation deck of New Geneva, watching representatives from 43 species work together in ways that the old council had never achieved. And the mobile diplomatic station existed partially in folded space, making it invisible to hostile forces, while remaining accessible to those who sought genuine cooperation. The Free Species Alliance now includes 67% of all known sentient species, reported Dr. Song Rin from her diplomatic analysis. Station membership continues to grow as more species seek alternatives to Velkari or Nexari domination. Admiral Choi Yun entered the observation area, carrying reports from the refugee assistance operations, and her expression showed both satisfaction and concern. We've successfully relocated 8 million beings to safe systems, she said, but the demand for sanctuary continues to increase. Captain Ju Wan joined them from his position as Alliance military coordinator, and his reports covered the defensive capabilities that protected the growing alliance. Our dimensional shield technology has proven completely effective, he said. Neither the Velkari nor Nexari have been able to locate our primary bases or intercept our communications. President Kang Yul walked to the main display where the current galactic situation appeared in stark detail, and what had once been the unified council space was now divided between 3 major factions. Status of the old council territory, he asked. The Velkari Empire controls approximately 30%. Dr. Song Rin replied. The Nexari Collective holds 25%, and the remaining 45% is either neutral, destroyed, or has joined our alliance. This transformation had happened faster than anyone had predicted, and the rigid hierarchies of the council had collapsed when species realized they had alternatives to submission. Admiral Choi Yun brought up casualty reports from the ongoing Velkari-Nexari conflict, and the numbers were sobering. Estimated deaths from the war now exceed 200 million, she said, and both sides continue to demand more resources from their remaining allies. What about species still trapped between them? President Kang Yul asked. We are conducting covert evacuation operations, Captain Ju Wan replied. Our dimensional technology allows us to relocate entire populations without the warring factions detecting the movements. Dr. Song Rin activated a holographic display showing the social and technological development within Alliance space, and the results demonstrated the effectiveness of cooperative rather than hierarchical approaches. Alliance members are innovating at unprecedented rates, she reported. When species share knowledge freely instead of hoarding advantages, everyone benefits. This was humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization, and not superior technology or military power, but rather the social innovations that made genuine cooperation possible. President Kang Yul received an urgent communication from the Alliance Council, where representatives from member species worked together to address common challenges. The Corvani delegation has a proposal, the voice reported. They want to attempt direct diplomatic contact with moderate factions within Velkari space. This was a development that Kang Yul had been expecting, and the Alliance could not remain isolated forever while billions suffered. Under the collapsing council system. What's their assessment of success, he asked. Low probability of immediate success, came the reply. But they believe some Velkari leaders are beginning to question the cost of continued warfare. Admiral Choi Yun looked up from her military reports, and her expression was cautious. Any contact with council remnants carries risks, she warned. Both the Velkari and Nexari view the alliance as a threat to their authority. Captain Ju Wan was analyzing tactical implications, and his assessment was more optimistic. Our defensive capabilities make direct military confrontation extremely unlikely, he said, and our refugee assistance operations have already demonstrated our peaceful intentions. Dr. Song Rin brought up intelligence reports on internal developments within Velkari space, and the picture was encouraging. We're detecting increasing dissent among Velkari colonial governors, she said. Many are questioning orders to continue conscripting troops for a war that serves no clear purpose. This was exactly what humanity had hoped would happen, and the artificial unity that had held the old council together was breaking down as individual species and leaders began to think for themselves. President Kang Yul made his decision and turned to his senior advisors, authorized the diplomatic contact. He ordered, but ensure we're offering alternatives, not ultimatums. As his staff moved to implement the decision, Kang Yul reflected on how much had changed since Ambassador Choi Wan walked out of the council chamber 3 years earlier. The communication system activated with a priority transmission from one of their deep space monitoring stations. President, the voice reported, we're detecting massive energy signatures from the core council systems, and it appears both the Velkari and Nexari are preparing for a decisive battle. Admiral Choi Yun quickly accessed tactical data, and her expression showed alarm. They're mobilizing everything, she said. This isn't another skirmish, they're preparing for total war. Captain Ju Wan was analyzing the strategic implications, and his assessment was grim. If they commit their full fleets to mutual destruction, he said, the aftermath will destabilize the entire galaxy. Dr. Song Rin looked up from her diplomatic analysis, and her voice was urgent. We need to accelerate our outreach efforts, she said. There may not be much time to offer alternatives. President Kang Yul walked to the main viewport and looked out at the stars that surrounded New Geneva, and somewhere in that darkness, the remnants of galactic civilization were preparing to destroy themselves, begin Phase 7 operations. Phase 7. He ordered full diplomatic initiative to all remaining neutral species. The next few hours saw unprecedented activity, as human diplomatic teams made simultaneous contact with dozens of species throughout the galaxy, and the message was simple and consistent. Cooperation was possible, alternatives existed, and no one had to choose between domination and submission. The response exceeded all expectations, and within days, 17 species had requested emergency evacuation of their populations, while 23 others sent delegations to New Geneva to discuss alliance membership. Captain Ju Wan received reports from the evacuation operations, and his expression showed amazement at the scale of the logistics involved. We're relocating entire civilizations, he said, and our dimensional technology is making it possible to move millions of beings without the warring factions even noticing. Dr. Song Rin was monitoring communications from across the galaxy, and her readings showed the rapid spread of information about Alliance alternative species are sharing information about our offer faster than we can make formal contact. She reported, the word is spreading that genuine cooperation is possible. President Kang Yul received a communication that made him smile for the first time in days. Sir, the voice reported, we've received a message from a group of Velkari colonial governors, and they're requesting secret negotiations about joining the alliance. This was the breakthrough that humanity had been working toward, and even within the Velkari Empire. Some leaders were beginning to question the value of hierarchy and domination. Admiral Choi Yun looked up from her tactical displays, and her expression was thoughtful. The final battle between the Velkari and Nexari main fleets is scheduled for next week, she said. Regardless of who wins, both civilizations will be devastated. Then we'll be ready to help rebuild, President Kang Yul replied, but this time we'll build something better. He activated the general communication system and addressed, all human personnel throughout Alliance space 3 years ago. We left the Galactic Council because we refused to accept that cooperation required submission, he said. Today, we offer the galaxy proof that there is a better way. The final phase of the Alliance expansion began immediately, and human diplomatic teams made open contact with species throughout the galaxy, and the message was broadcast on all frequencies. The Free Species Alliance offered partnership to any species willing to treat others as equals. The response was overwhelming, and within a month, the Alliance included over 200 species, and the old council structure had been completely replaced by networks of voluntary cooperation. The Velkari-Nexari War ended not with victory for either side, but with exhaustion and internal collapse. As their remaining colonies defected to join the Alliance, President Kang Yul stood once again on the observation deck of New Geneva and watched as former enemies worked together on projects that benefited everyone. Final status report? He asked. Dr. Song Rin. The Alliance now includes 87% of all known sentient species, she replied. The old hierarchy-based system has been completely replaced by voluntary cooperation networks. Admiral Choi Yun joined them with the last military reports. No hostile forces remain in Alliance space, she said. The few species that chose isolation are respected and protected. Captain Ju Wan looked up from his coordination displays, and his expression showed deep satisfaction. Alliance members are not only cooperating, he said, they're innovating together at rates that exceed anything achieved under the old council system. President Kang Yul walked to the viewing area where a group of children from different species played together. We